Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, or good after midnight. Whatever time you're watching this video, welcome to another episode of Greg Blends. Now, in today's episode, I'm not actually going to be doing anything in Blender. Instead, I'm going to try to get Blender to run, specifically the first version of Blender. Now, recently I've been thinking about, I've had a long history with Blender. I think I started around like 2.2 something, probably around the year 2000 or 2001. And it really brings back a lot of nostalgia when I open up an old version of Blender. But I decided to see what Blender 1.0 was like, and the only thing I could find on the internet was this 2012 video from the Mango Open Movie Project of Ton, the founder, showing off Blender on what is presumably a Silicon Graphics machine.
15. Z. No, whoa, Z even. Wow, that's sweet. And then you go to the material something.
And I'll skip through this video a bit.
Wow. How old is this?
This is from 92.
What the fuck?
93. 1992.
Oh, back then, wasn't it? Yeah.
And so anyways, I really wanted to see this actually working. Now, he says that's from 1992, and I think the first version of Blender was 1994, but if you know the history of Blender, it started from Neo Geo, which was their studio for doing 3D graphics, and so their internal tool eventually became Blender anyways, and as you can see, this does look like the early version of Blender. So, this was the only information I could find. This is as far back as I could get visual evidence of early Blender, but I have yet to see anyone talk about actually running Blender 1.0. But it does say we have it right here. So if you go to the downloads and you go to Blender 1.0, there's the zip file and it's for Irix. Now what is Irix? So back in the day, there was this company, Silicon Graphics, and they made all of the workstation and a lot of the early 3D hardware and software for 3D graphics. They were kind of like the industry standard, Pixar would use them, etc. And they had a custom operating system based on Unix, and it was the one in Jurassic Park where she's like, it's a Unix system, I know this. Well, that was an Irix system. And so this is, it ran on a MIPS processor, so it's hard to get a virtual machine working, but my first instinct was, let's set up a VM and see if I can get Irix working, and if so, perhaps I'll be able to get Blender 1.0 working. And so that's where I started. Now, there's this thing called MAME, which is the Multiple Arcade Machine Emulator. Now, this started off as an emulator for arcade games, but over the years, people started expanding it to also emulate other platforms, including general-purpose computing platforms, not just arcade games. And so I found an Irix CHD file and a ROM for the Irix system. And so let's start this up. Now, this is running in the MAME emulator, and what I found is, I didn't know this before, there's a lot of very choppy audio, that MAME can actually have a CHD file. And let me just move this out of the way here, which is a hard drive file. So any changes I make in the system once we boot up here will actually persist, which is really cool. Now, the command to run it is this, and you can see we specify a hard drive as well as a CD-ROM, and that will come in later. Now, this is running about 30% speed, so it's incredibly slow. It's crazy how this is an ancient system from over 20 years ago, and my computer, which is pretty beastly, is still struggling to emulate it. Of course, I'm sure the emulation could be optimized quite a bit. Probably not a lot of developers working on emulating this hardware, but I'm going to probably play this part of the video in fast forward because it does take quite a while to boot, and it certainly doesn't help that it's running at 30% speed. All right, and we have the login screen. So I'll go ahead and log in as root. And now it shouldn't take too much longer. It's going to stay on this blank blue screen for about a minute here, but it shouldn't be too much longer before we're actually at the desktop. So I'll fast forward until we're there. All right, here's the desktop, and like I said, this system is running in MAME, but it doesn't have network support, so there is internet options here. It doesn't actually connect to the internet, so there's no way to download that version of Blender. And it took me a couple hours to realize how I can get files onto this system. Now remember, I said earlier, you can actually specify an ISO for a CD-ROM. And that's exactly what I did. So if we open up this CD-ROM drive, and it has funny sound effects for everything that run at 30% speed, you can see I have Blender 1.0. So let's copy this to our system. You can't run things directly from the CD-ROM because it is a read-only device. And if Blender needs to make any changes or read any files or whatever, it doesn't help it to be in a read-only environment. So let's see if we can get this open here. And I love this old computer system. It's really exciting to see IRIX in action. Probably very few people have seen this operating system. Of course, the graphics kind of look like a generic, I guess it's called X-Win or whatever environment from back in the day, but I just love this old aesthetic, these icons, etc. So I'm going to create a Blender folder to put our Blender stuff in. All right. And then instead of double clicking it, I'm going to try to navigate to it here so we reuse the same window. There we go. And let's copy this over. And yeah, see, it's a read-only system, so copy. And we are done with our CD-ROM, so I will close that. And for the moment of truth, does Blender 1.0 run in 2020? It looks like it's doing something, but it immediately closes. So the next thing I wanted to do was see if I could run it from the command line. So if we go over to System, Utilities, and start a new console. This is a Unix-based system, so it'll have some of the Unix commands that you might be familiar with. So we will attempt to go to that directory. And the keyboard input is super obnoxious because it is incredibly slow. I don't know what happened there. Come on. You have to deliberately, I'm sure you can hear my keyboard, press every key very slowly. And do we have it? There it is. So I promise I normally type faster than that. And it loads, and here's what is promising to me. This file, which I downloaded in Windows 10, is a binary executable for the IRIX system that run on a MIPS processor, and it actually is running. It says can't find button image. Then it says, some memory block free, attempt to free this, null pointer, does it a bunch of times, and then Blender quit. So, can't find button image. Well, I Googled that. And it says, it looks like there aren't any great matches for your search. And yet, it finds this from download.blender.org, where it says can't find button image. And this certainly looks like source code. So if I click that, and we give it a look-see, it is the source code, and this is from January 1994. So we saw Ton talking about the version that he was demonstrating from 92 or 3, and here is a source file from 94, which is amazing. And I do like how I can't read the comments, but it does appear to be pretty well commented, which I like. And you know, I can read some of them. For instance, I can't read this or this or this or this, but I can read red alert. I don't know what that means. Apparently, at one point there was a header button called red alert. I don't know if Blender was an early warning system for nukes or something, but here's the line in question: can't find button image. So if we go back, it says if bbuff equals 0, okay, was bbuff, load if name string. I assume this means load image file from name, just a guess. And up here we have sprintf string print to the string buffer %s/blenderbuttons. So the file name will be blenderbuttons, and it looks like it gets an environment variable called blender directory or blender-dir. So what it's going to look like is blender directory /blenderbuttons. Okay, well, I don't have this file, but I assume blender directory means a system environment variable. And if we scroll down somewhere around here, I don't know where it is, down here. Yeah, okay. It says if get environment blender directory equals 0, then print that the environment variable is not set. So that's pretty much what I would expect it to be. So let's go and try that out. Now, I did some research on Irix, and I found out you could do this. Let's clear. And you can say set env for environment. And we'll do blender-dir, just like they said. And we will set this to Blender. Now to test, we can say blender-dir, and we get back the correct thing. So now what I want to do is create a file here for it to read. So I'm going to say touch, and it wanted Blender buttons. All right, and you can see it created that file. So now, let's try it again. Starts up, and the same error. Can't find button image. One thing that I did notice is, let's see. It says if bbuff equals 0, then print that. So I thought, well, maybe because I created a file that didn't have any content, that's why it didn't work. So even though I didn't know what this file was, I thought maybe it just needs some content. So, you know, it might load, but the graphics will be corrupt because it's the wrong type of data or something. So desktop, or where is it? I have no idea how to use this. Find, there it is. Find applications. And it's so slow, but I love all these old icons. So let's open up Jot. And while that loads, we have Mozilla, Netscape Mail, Acrobat Reader. Man, I love exploring old systems. So let's just do, but please work, save. And we will put this over there. All right. Make sure we have that. It's there. And not surprisingly, we get the same error. Of course, I'm not going to show you everything I tried. I did try some other things like changing this to be lowercase, and not using the trailing slash, for instance. But no matter what I did, I couldn't get it to work. Now, I did find something interesting, however. So, I'm going to shut the system down, because in order to show you the next thing, I need to have it shut off. So let's go to System, Shut Down System, and we will power off. And while that does that in the background, I will show you the next thing I found. So, what I noticed here is I copied this link and I pasted it, and I went to a couple directories up, and I noticed that this file that we were looking at is in Blender 1.46 source. So if we go up to there, interesting, there is a Blender buttons and 1 and 2 and all of the source files. Now, I have no intention of actually figuring out how to compile this. It would be way beyond my ability. I particularly hate dealing with make files and trying to compile, especially on a foreign system that is running at 30% speed. But it is interesting to see that this source goes way far back. And it looks like the earliest version is 1.46, which isn't quite Blender 1.0, but it's promising because these files that it needs are at least here. So I went here and I got the Blender 1.46 source.tar.gz, and I have it open here in WinRAR. There's the file. So how's our... Okay, so at this point, you can just close. There we go. So in MAME, I have this testcd.iso, which we have right here in PowerISO. So if I take this source code, put it onto the CD, save changes, and now we can wait for IRIX to start again. The reason why I had to shut down is because the CD ISO would be in use by the emulator, and you would not be able to overwrite it. So here we go again, another fast forward of trying to boot up this machine. All right, and we are back, and I love how this old system kind of just opens all your windows and brings you exactly where you left off. That seems like a pretty modern feature, but apparently IRIX had that feature. So this was the fake Blender buttons file that we made, so I'm going to go ahead and remove that. And now when we open our CD-ROM, we should have some more files. After we die of old age, waiting for it to open. All right, and we don't need this window anymore. Now, the error is looking for Blender buttons, but I'm going to go ahead and copy all three of these because why not? Drop those off the CD-ROM. And I don't think there's anything else on this that we need. And I'm also not going to wait for the UI to update. So let's close that. Let's do some housekeeping, sort by name. Now I'm going to select everything, and just for, I don't know, thoroughness, I'm going to set the permissions to be completely open. I don't know that much about the system, but you know, just in case, I'm going to give it complete permissions for read, write, and execute for all of these files. Just in case that helps something happen. Now, I did try this before, but I'm always still hoping that maybe I did something wrong last time, or I don't know. So hopefully it'll work, but probably won't. Let's just apply that. All right, so close this. Now, I do believe that the environment variables get unset. So if we say echo Blender dir it is undefined. So let's go reset that. And just for fun, I'll do the lowercase as well, because who knows? Well, it's not really fun, but just for just for hoping. All right, here we go. And nothing, the same error. So at this point, I'm kind of stuck, because it seems like if we go over here, Blender's official file that you get from download.blender.org is just a binary. And it's interesting because the binary does actually work. We're getting messages from inside the compiled source code of Blender 1.0. So the binary is running, but it's looking for button image. And the source code I found isn't for 1.0, it's for 1.4 something or other. It is for 1.46, and I can't find source code for 1.0, but if we look at the source code for 1.46, it looks like it's trying to open up something called blenderbuttons, and that's what causes it to print can't find button image. So I assume the file it's looking for we've found. Assuming the code hasn't changed too much from Blender 1.0 to 1.46, it's looking for something called blenderbuttons, and it's looking for an environment variable. Now here's one thing, however, that I noticed that we haven't talked about, is that if you follow the code from main, so I guess this is, you know, the main function, the entry point to the program, we init globals, we do some stuff, blah, 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 do some more stuff, init user defines, and right here it says, if get environment blender directory equals 0, then it should actually say error, blender directory environment variable not set. But we're not getting this message. Now, if I were to restart the machine, there would be no environment variable. And like I showed you earlier in the video, I tried running Blender before setting the environment variable, and it still had that same error message, which means no matter how many times I change the environment variable in the console, it doesn't actually affect the program. So what I'm thinking is perhaps in 1.46, this environment variable thing was added. So in the previous 1.0 version of Blender, it's looking for that file in a hard-coded path. Whereas in later versions of Blender, they made the environment variable. Because even if I try to run this Blender executable without having set the environment variable, just leaving it empty, it still says can't find button image, which leads me to believe that it's not actually looking at the environment variable. Because if it was, then we should have gotten this error instead before I set the environment variable. So I'm thinking that the 1.0 version is looking for that file in a very specific path. Instead of trying to concatenate this to blenderbuttons, it just is looking for blenderbuttons on a specific place in the system, or it's looking for somehow it gets this path in another way besides the environment variables. So I'm kind of stuck here. I don't really know where to go from here. I don't know anything about using Irix machines, and it's really exciting that the code is actually running, but I just don't know how to configure it. But it does seem to be looking for this file. And this is a slightly newer version of the file. It's from 1.46 as opposed to 1.0. But if this is a binary, which is working, but it's looking for a file that it doesn't come with, then I think Blender needs to update this. Because they said you'll always be able to download every version of Blender at any time. It's yours to keep forever. You'll also find these gems, the first Irix Blender version. Of course, when you actually go there and you download this zip file, the only thing in it is the binary file which we just tried to run, Blender 1.0. So it seems like Blender's official upload is missing files. Now there's probably at least dozens of us who desperately need to run the first version of Blender, but can't because this zip file is missing things. It would be great if somebody at Blender saw this video and tried to get this to be an updated zip file with everything that we need. So while I couldn't get this working, let's talk about something a little bit more positive. All right, so I decided, well, if I can't get this to work, what's the next one? Blender 1.6. And that is for Windows. And I'm on Windows. I'm on Windows 10. So I downloaded that, and this one won't work either. Of course, I did all the typical troubleshooting, compatibility, Windows 7, let's make it 98, run as administrator, give me a virus, and still doesn't work. So I was a little bit disappointed there, but then I realized, hey, I could run it in a virtual machine. So I have this Windows XP box, and I installed it, and I realized something. Do I have the installer anymore? I don't. Well, whatever. So when I run it, it says can't open cwindows.bbkey. And let's run this again, and you can see it says error, no B key found. Saving files is disabled. Visit blender.nl. And so this version of Blender was from a time where, a very short time where you actually had to pay for Blender. And if I try to hit Control S, it says no B key, information available. If I go to File, Save, it will not let me save. So I needed a key file. So I did what you would do, and you reach out to Ton. I said, can you send me a .bbkey file for Blender 1.6, please? I want to try to make something in the oldest version of Blender for Windows, just for fun, but I need a BBKey. And an hour later, I couldn't believe it, Ton actually got back to me, and he was like, I've got you. And now this Blender directory has, from July 5th, 2020, a BKey file. So that was a major win. So let's go and install that. Let's close Blender. I think I have it in my documents. There it is. And we know that it looks for it in Windows. So let's go over to Windows, move that over. Boom. And if we run Blender, no error. No error. And if we try to go to File, Save, it still doesn't work. But the good news is it does have autosave. So if we make this C and set this to 1 minute, it will save every minute. So autosave works. So if we go down to C, Blender temp, I have to make it, this is an old version. I have to go to this and make it, is it blend? Yeah, just blend temp. So by doing that, I can turn off trackball, delete this plane. I love how a lot of the shortcuts that I'm familiar with, are actually still working. There's my cube. Put it up there. Let's add a lamp. And let's render. Hey, let's move that lamp up a bit. Make it a bit stronger. Look at that. Let me move my camera. Nice. Can I do fly? Yes, I can fly a little bit. Well, you get the idea. It actually crashed before it could save, but it will save. So with that B key, autosave, as long as I set the correct directory and I turn it on, it will save. So I can actually make something in this version of Blender, and every minute it will save. So I can't actually Control S because for some reason it doesn't open up the file dialog. If I do go to, there's no pop-up menu. You have to manually scroll these. there is the file dialog thing for here. You can save renders, but you can't save the actual Blender file, the .blend. I have no idea how to get it to do that. Like, I could try hitting enter here, but you know, it doesn't write anywhere. Let's go to Documents and Settings. There we go. All users, desktop. Okay, so we're here. Can I save? Oh, maybe that worked. No, there's nothing on the desktop. Yeah, so I don't know how to actually save. It looks like it's doing something, but then there is no file that appears on my desktop. So, yeah, well, oh, no such directory. There's an error. But I think that's when I was trying to save in the main directory. Well, anyways, with the BBKey, at least the temp autosave worked. So that was a win. So in a future video, I will be making something in the earliest version of Blender that I can get running, which is 1.6, which I'm still really excited about. I love how a lot of the shortcut keys that I know still work. Of course, a lot are missing, but this is super nostalgic because one of my first versions of Blender was similar to this. So, anyways, I would still love to see Blender 1.0 running. If anybody knows anything about IRIX, if they know anything about Blender 1.0, if they could figure out from the source or from somewhere how to make this work, or if you actually have a Silicon Graphics machine and you can test this, there is a possibility that maybe this file contains Blender buttons built in and it tries to unpack it or something, but because I'm running on a MAME virtual machine, it just doesn't work. So if anybody has a physical machine and can try to run it, that would be fantastic. You know where to find it. It's right here on Blender 1.0. But I highly suspect that this zip file is missing files. They did give us the binary. The binary does run. It's just, it's missing files, or it's missing some kind of config file to tell it where those button images are. So that was my best effort. If any ideas come my way, I'll try to make an update video. But my next video is going to be playing with Blender 1.6, and I'm going to try to make something. And I'm really excited about that because I've learned so much about 3D modeling in the meantime, and I've also learned a lot about Blender. I've been doing it for 20 years. So a lot of the stuff that I didn't understand about this interface when I was young, I now understand. So I might be able to make something cool. Hopefully. Hopefully it won't crash too much. But that's it for today. And if anybody can help me get Blender 1.0 running, please reach out. Email me. You can find my email on my YouTube. And please reach out if you can get Blender 1.0 running, because I would love to see the first Blender with my own eyes and not just in a YouTube video. Alrighty guys, that's it for today.